There is a story we are told about the modern world. A story of progress, of ingenuity, of great men overcoming great challenges. In London, that story is carved in brick and iron, deep beneath the streets. It is the story of the Victorian sewer system, a monument to industrial might, built to save a city from filth and disease. The official narrative is clean, heroic, and simple. Between 1859 and 1875, an engineer named Joseph Bazalgette orchestrated a miracle. In just 16 years, his teams excavated over 3.5 million cubic yards of earth. They manufactured, transported, and laid 318 million bricks. They built 82 miles of massive, intercepting sewers that transformed the city and became the blueprint for the modern world. This is the story we are told. But it is not the true story. The numbers do not work. The logistics are impossible. The timeline is a fantasy. When you subject this heroic tale to simple, rational analysis, the entire narrative collapses under its own weight. It's not a question of whether the system exists. It is there, a sprawling, cathedral-like network in the dark. The question is how it got there. The evidence we will examine tonight, the simple math of materials, transport, and labor, suggests that London's foundation is built upon a profound historical lie. We are not looking at a feat of Victorian construction. We are looking at something else entirely. To understand the scale of the problem, we must first go underground. We must see what was supposedly built. The London sewers are not merely functional pipes. They are architectural wonders. Descend into the darkness, and you find yourself in vast, vaulted chambers. Tunnels wide enough to drive a train through, stretching for miles in perfect, arrow-straight lines. The brickwork is immaculate. Each of the 318 million bricks is set with a precision that borders on the artistic. Complex, curved junctions meet with geometric perfection. Great cathedrals of brick rise at key intersections, complete with ornate ironwork and decorative flourishes. This is not the work of men simply trying to move waste. This is the work of master craftsmen creating a subterranean palace. The official name is the interceptor sewer system, but it feels more like a hidden city, an underworld built to outlast the one above. Now, contrast this image of sublime, ordered engineering with the world it was supposedly born from. Look at the photographs of Victorian London from the 1860s. The world above ground is a chaotic scene of horse-drawn carts, narrow, winding streets choked with mud and refuse, and a populace struggling with the realities of the early industrial age. It is a world of organic, messy, and often haphazard growth. Yet, we are asked to believe that this society, in just 16 years, created a perfectly ordered, architecturally magnificent underworld directly beneath its own chaotic footprint. The visual language does not match. The pristine, sweeping arches below do not look like a product of the crowded, dirty streets above. How could a civilization that struggled to keep its own streets clean and orderly, design and execute such a flawless, monumental system in secret, right under its own feet? The anomaly is not just in the scale, but in the style. The grandeur seems misplaced. The perfection feels anachronistic. It's as if two different worlds, from two different eras, were forced together. One above, one below. One chaotic and documented, the other perfect and mysterious. Why build something so ornate, so beautiful, only to bury it in darkness forever? Was this level of craftsmanship truly just for utilitarian purposes? The visual evidence alone presents a jarring contradiction, a silent question written in millions of perfect bricks. The story begins to unravel completely when we move from the visual to the practical. The project is presented as a straightforward, if massive, construction job. But the logistics of it, in the context of the mid-19th century, are simply staggering. Let's begin with the excavation. 3.5 million cubic yards of earth. It's a number so large it's almost meaningless. So let's make it concrete. A typical horse-drawn cart of the era, a tumbrel, could hold about 1 cubic yard of soil. This means the project required 3.5 million cartloads of earth to be moved. The project spanned 16 years, or roughly 5,840 days. Even if we assume they worked every single day, without weekends, holidays, or interruptions from weather, that's 600 cartloads of earth being excavated and hauled away, every single day. Now, where do you move 600 cartloads of spoil through the streets of London? The city was already famous for its great stink and its gridlock traffic. Adding 600 carts to this dense network, every day, just for soil removal, seems untenable. And that doesn't account for the carts coming in. We have the matter of the 318 million bricks. A typical cart could carry around 500 bricks. To transport 318 million bricks, you would need 636,000 cartloads. Over the 16-year period, that is an additional 110 cartloads arriving at construction sites every single day. So now we have over 700 cart trips, in and out, clogging the city daily, just for soil and bricks. This ignores the transport of millions of tons of sand, gravel, and Portland cement for the mortar. It ignores the delivery of tools, timber for scaffolding, iron for machinery, and food and water for the thousands of workers. The logistical train required to service this project would have brought the city to a complete and total standstill. Where did the materials even come from? 318 million bricks is not a trivial amount. It would require dozens of brickyards working at full capacity, year-round, dedicated to this single project. Did southern England's brick manufacturing capacity suddenly explode to meet this demand, with no record of such a massive industrial ramp-up? How were these bricks moved from the kilns to the city? By barge, then by cart. Each step adds another layer of logistical complexity that the official history glosses over with vague statements about ingenuity. The manpower itself is a mystery. Thousands of navvies or navigators were said to have built the system. They worked in dark, dangerous tunnels with little more than candlelight, picks, and shovels. The coordination required to manage this workforce, to excavate precisely, to lay bricks to such a high standard, and to do it all simultaneously across 82 miles of the city, suggests a command and control structure that seems far beyond a civil works project. It resembles a military operation in its scale and required precision. Yet the records of this mobilization, this incredible flow of material and men, are cursory at best. The story asks us to believe in a miracle of logistics that has no parallel and is unsupported by the physical constraints of the era. When faced with such profound logistical questions, we turn to the historical record for answers. We look for the detailed plans, the supply manifests, the daily work logs, the financial ledgers that would explain how this was achieved. What we find is a narrative that is suspiciously thin. The official story is almost entirely biographical. It focuses on the genius of one man, Joseph Bazalgette, and the political will of the Metropolitan Board of Works. The story is presented as a heroic triumph over disease, a simple cause and effect narrative. The Great Stink of 1858 terrified Parliament, so they gave Bazalgette a blank check, and he solved the problem. It is a compelling story. But it is not an explanation. It is a legend. Where are the granular details? Where are the records detailing the procurement of 318 million bricks? Is there a master ledger showing which brickyards supplied them, on what dates, and at what cost? Where are the contracts for the thousands of carts and horses required for transport? Where are the payrolls for the vast army of navvies, engineers, and support staff? While some high-level records exist, committee meeting minutes, parliamentary acts, overall budgets, the low-level, operational data that would prove the day-to-day viability of the project is largely missing. What we have are celebratory accounts written after the fact, books and articles praising the finished work, but they rarely, if ever, dive into the mundane, mathematical reality of how it was done. It feels as if the how has been deliberately obscured, replaced by a more palatable story of a single visionary hero. This pattern of a simplified, hero-centric narrative is a common feature in historical records that seek to obscure a more complex or inconvenient truth. By crediting one man with a superhuman feat, it discourages deeper inquiry. The genius of Bazalgette becomes the answer to every impossible question. How did they move the earth? Bazalgette's genius. How did they source the bricks? Bazalgette's genius. The explanation becomes a circular, unprovable appeal to authority. Furthermore, the records that do exist often seem to contradict the timeline. Small sections of the project are documented, but when you attempt to extrapolate those timelines and costs across the entire 82-mile system, the 16-year timeframe seems wholly inadequate. The official story fails because it does not provide evidence. It provides a narrative. It substitutes biography for logistics and anecdote for data. For a project that is held up as a pinnacle of Victorian record-keeping and engineering, the lack of detailed documentation on its most fundamental processes is a profound and telling silence. If the construction of the London sewers was an isolated anomaly, it might be dismissed as a one-time historical miracle, a case of records being poorly kept. But it is not an isolated event. When we widen our view, we see the same pattern repeating itself in major cities across the world, all within the same narrow historical window of the mid to late 19th century. Consider Paris. Between 1852 and 1870, under the direction of Baron Haussmann, the city was famously rebuilt. Part of this project was the massive expansion of the Parisian sewer system. The story is identical to London's. A visionary leader, a response to a public health crisis, and the creation of a vast, ornate, and architecturally magnificent subterranean network. The Parisian sewers are, like London's, far more grand than necessary for their purpose, with high, arched ceilings and walkways. And like London, the logistical details of their rapid construction are glossed over in favor of the heroic narrative of Haussmann's vision. We see similar stories in other cities. In Hamburg, Germany, after a great fire in 1842, an English engineer named William Lindley designed one of the first comprehensive underground sewer networks on the continent, a project of immense scale and complexity for its time. In cities across the United States, from Chicago to Providence, the late 19th century saw the sudden appearance of massive, intricate brick sewer systems. In each case, the narrative is the same: a city facing a crisis, a brilliant engineer with a plan, and a miraculously swift construction period. And in each case, the same questions of logistics, material sourcing, and labor apply. The architectural motifs even repeat. The same style of grand, vaulted brick arches appears in the foundations of cities thousands of miles apart. It's as if they were all working from a common, unacknowledged blueprint. This is not to say that no construction took place. Of course it did, but the pattern suggests that the official narratives, of building these colossal systems from scratch in record time, may be a coordinated template. A cover story used to explain the sudden integration of massive, pre-existing infrastructure. The alternative is to believe that dozens of cities across the Western world, all at once, independently developed the capacity for logistical miracles. That they all simultaneously managed to source billions of bricks, move millions of tons of earth with horse-drawn carts, and coordinate vast armies of laborers to build identical, ornate underground palaces, all while leaving behind similarly sparse logistical records. The more logical conclusion is that we are not looking at dozens of independent miracles. We are looking at a single, global phenomenon that has been systematically misdocumented. The story of London is not just London's story. It is the key to understanding a much wider historical puzzle. Let us set aside the grand narratives and focus on the cold, hard numbers. This is where the story irretrievably breaks down. We will focus on one aspect: the laying of the 318 million bricks. The project ran for 16 years. Let's be generous and assume a 6-day workweek with 2 weeks off per year. That gives us approximately 4,800 working days. To lay 318 million bricks in 4,800 days, the workforce would need to lay an average of 66,250 bricks every single day. Let's try to visualize that. A master bricklayer, working in ideal conditions, good light, open space, materials readily at hand, can perhaps lay 500 to 700 bricks in a 10-hour day. The conditions in the London Underground were the opposite of ideal. They were dark, cramped, wet, and dangerous. The air was foul. Materials had to be lowered down shafts and moved through narrow tunnels. Under these brutal conditions, a bricklayer would be doing exceptionally well to lay 300 bricks a day. So, to meet the daily target of 66,250 bricks, the project would have needed a team of over 220 master bricklayers working at peak efficiency, every single day, for 16 years straight. This does not include the teams mixing the mortar. It does not include the teams bringing the bricks and mortar to the bricklayers. It does not include the teams of diggers working just ahead of them. The total workforce in the tunnels at any one time must have been in the thousands. Now consider the logistics of that workforce. How do you get thousands of men into and out of these tunnels every day? How do you provide them with light and air? How do you manage the incredible symphony of simultaneous operations across dozens of miles of tunnels without modern communication? But the brick problem is even worse. We used an average. In reality, the project started slow and ramped up. During the peak years of construction, The daily brick-laying rate must have been well over 100,000. That would require double the workforce, perhaps 400 or 500 master bricklayers and their support crews, all working in the dark. Where did this army of highly skilled artisans come from? Was there a surplus of 500 master bricklayers in London, all willing and able to take on the most dangerous, unpleasant work imaginable? The numbers require a level of manpower, skill, and coordination that seems impossible to source and manage with 19th-century technology. The math of the transportation is just as damning. As we calculated earlier, over 700 daily cart trips for just soil and bricks. Let's assume a working day of 10 hours. That's more than one cart arriving or leaving a worksite every single minute, across the whole city. It is a constant, unending stream of heavy traffic. This is not a construction project. It is a permanent, city-wide state of logistical siege. The numbers do not lie. They paint a clear picture of a project whose claimed achievements are fundamentally incompatible with the physical and mathematical realities of the era. The evidence shows that the official narrative is not credible. The logistics do not work. The numbers do not add up. The global pattern suggests a wider story. So, what actually happened? This investigation does not propose secret technologies or alien intervention. The most logical explanation is often the simplest, even if it is unsettling. It is a hypothesis grounded in the evidence we have reviewed. The hypothesis is this: the Great Victorian Engineering Project was not one of creation, but of discovery and integration. The teams led by Bazalgette did not build 82 miles of massive intercepting sewers from scratch. Instead, they discovered a vast, pre-existing network of tunnels beneath the city. An older, more ancient system of unknown origin. Their monumental task was not to build, but to repair, to clean out, to connect, and to adapt this existing infrastructure to their needs. This hypothesis resolves all of the major impossibilities at once. The impossible timeline becomes plausible. They weren't digging 82 miles of new tunnels. They were clearing out 82 miles of old ones. They were adding junctions, building new access shafts, and lining sections with new brickwork. This was still a massive undertaking, but it is a project of renovation, not fabrication. The logistical nightmare of material transport is drastically reduced. The 3.5 million cubic yards of earth was not pristine soil being excavated for the first time. It was centuries of silt and debris being cleared out. The 318 million bricks were not used to construct the primary tunnels from nothing, but to line and reinforce existing passageways, a process that requires far fewer bricks per linear foot. This would also explain the visual anomaly. The grand, cathedral-like architecture was not a strange Victorian flourish for a utilitarian project. It was the original design of the system they found. The Victorians were not the architects of this subterranean world, they were its inheritors. This explains the lack of detailed records for the construction phase. There are no detailed records because that phase, as described, never happened. The records focus on Bazalgette's genius for planning the asterisk interconnections, for designing the pumping stations, and for making the old system work for the 19th century city. The story was simplified, and Bazalgette was credited with the entire creation to provide a clean, heroic narrative of Victorian progress and to obscure the unsettling mystery of what they actually found down there. Who built the original system? That is a question the historical record, as it is presented to us, cannot answer. But acknowledging that the question even exists is the first step. The controlled hypothesis is not that the Victorians did nothing, but that what they did has been fundamentally mischaracterized. They were not builders. They were restorers. We have looked at the story of London's sewers, a story that is foundational to our idea of the modern city. We have seen the visual disconnect between the world above and the world below. We have examined the practical impossibility of the logistics, the failure of the official record to provide concrete answers, and the repeating pattern of this story across the globe. We have broken down the simple, undeniable numbers that show the official timeline cannot be correct. And we have proposed a controlled hypothesis, that this was a project of restoration, not creation. A story of inheritance, not invention. This does not take away from the work that was done. The Victorian engineers and laborers accomplished an enormous task. But the story we are told is, at best, incomplete. At worst, it is a deliberate fabrication designed to hide a history we are not meant to understand. It raises the question: what else about our foundational history is built on such a fragile narrative? What other great leaps of progress, when examined with simple logic and basic mathematics, begin to fall apart? The world beneath our feet is often more complex and mysterious than the world we see. The official histories, the simple stories of great men and great achievements, often serve to paper over these deeper, more difficult truths. The past is not always what it seems. We are encouraged to accept these stories without question. But the numbers do not care about narratives. The bricks do not care about heroes. They are physical facts. And the facts, in this case, tell a different story. The only path forward is to continue to question, to apply logic, and to look for the patterns that the official record tries to ignore. What lies beneath the surface of your own city? What stories are you being told, and do they truly add up? The investigation does not end here. If you believe there is more to the story, that our history is more complex than we have been led to believe, then join us. The truth is there for those who are willing to look.